Hey everybody, welcome to the Anointed Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Terry Linscott. I am so grateful that you're joining me today, that you're taking a few moments of your time to add value to your life, to listen to the content that I've created. And I really do pray that in the next few minutes, that as I speak to you, that you'll hear something that does add value to your life, that does adjust or tweak, or it's kind of like that chiropractic moment where you go and you get that vertebrae readjusted because you got a little nerve issue in your muscle and you just have to have that adjustment. And I pray today that this podcast kind of acts that way for your life to help you become the best leader, the best follower that you could ever become in your life. Before we get into the content today, which is, listen to this, having the heart of your leader. The importance of having the heart of your leader. That's the content we're going to jump into today. And again, before we get into it, I just want to ask you to do me a favor. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already done so. Leave me a comment or review. That really helps us, and it helps promote us, and it lets us know that we're adding value to your life. And then the last thing is really simple. Just share this with some friends, some family, some neighbors, some coworkers, other colleagues that you may have, that this content would add value to their life as well. I really do appreciate it, and I'm grateful that you're taking a few minutes of your time to help add value to your life. Listen to what God has put in my heart to help us as leaders as well as followers. Let's jump into it today. The content, again, the title is Having the Heart of Your Leader, the importance of having the heart of your leader. And I want to give you a theme verse. It is the Anointed Leadership Podcast, which is we're asking God to get on us and work in us and through us to accomplish what we've been called to do or we've been tasked to do by a leader. And so I really believe that when you find Bible verses for everything in life, that you actually find greater levels of success. I really believe that every aspect of leadership is found in the Scriptures. The greatest leader of all time, in my opinion, is Jesus Christ himself. He took 12 men, and he changed the world still 2,000 plus years later. It's still changing people's lives. It's still helping people become better versions of themselves every single day. And he did this over 2,000 years ago with 12 people. That you got to think about that. His influence into the life of humanity is so great that it's lasted over 2,000 years. Most leaders can't say that. Most leaders get a quote or two after 100 years of their life or after 20 years of their life. Jesus, man, 2,000 plus years, and people are still quoting him. People are still following him. And so we know that he was the greatest leader of all time. He is the GOAT, in my opinion, the greatest of all time in leadership. Amen. And so let's read a verse. In the book of Numbers, chapter 11, it says this, verse 25 says, Then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke to him, we're talking to Moses, and took the spirit that was upon him, Moses, and placed that same spirit upon the 70 elders. Now that's an interesting verse. And what's interesting is we're talking about Moses after he leads the children of Israel out of Egypt, and they're going into the promised land, and Moses is weighed down with the burden of leadership. He's weighed down with the burden of dealing with people and weighed down with the everyday business of running a country, if you will. And his father-in-law, which there's so much about leadership in his father-in-law, but he had counsel around him, Moses, the leader. He didn't just do it all himself. He didn't ask Jethro where he was when God spoke to him. He listened to those around him. This is so key if you want to be a successful leader. You can't have all the answers, and you need people around you. But he listens to his father-in-law, and he basically says, you're wearing yourself out. You can't do this on your own. You need to get some help. So you need to find some people. So Moses actually gets 72 people. There's 70 that are in the place, and there's 2 others that are still around that are still helping Moses with leadership in amongst the business of the day. And so 72 people receive the same spirit that was upon Moses. That's an interesting moment. So I think about this when I talk about leadership, and when I think about the success of a team, the success of a church, the success of any business, is when the team, the leadership team, or those that are in the team, have the same attitude, the same heart, the same spirit as the leader. Things look good. But when there's a division, which means the same heart isn't there, the same attitude isn't there, the same spirit isn't there, now you have a complete division, and people know it. And here's the interesting thing is God said, if you're going to have and produce leadership under you. I can't just tell you to give them information. Basically, he says, I need them to have your same heart, the things that drive you, the things that make you tick, the things that excite you, the vision that you have, to see it very plain. But I also need them to understand what makes you frustrated, what ticks you off, if you will, things that are irritating to you. I'm putting this whole kit and caboodle thing upon the leadership so they can help you, here's the key, deal with the burdens of everyday life, of the everyday business. Now, in ministry, we don't like to call it business. We like to call it, oh, it's ministry. It's not business. Can I help you? There is a business side to ministry. You got to deal with the government. You got to deal with money. You got to deal with the banks. You got to deal with leadership. You got to deal with people. You got to deal with facilities. There's a business side of it. And most people don't like to call ministry business, but you got to have a little bit of business in there to deal with the everyday stuff that goes on. In that moment, there's a burden, there's a weight that comes upon the leader when they have absolutely no help. I want you to realize that having the same heart as your leader simply means this. You've caught his vision, you got his heart, you have the same attitude about what the purpose is, as well as you have the same response to problems and to victories that they would have. That's what this really looks like. The things that he would celebrate, you're going to celebrate. The things that he's going to pray for, you're going to pray for. The things that are going to just tick him off, they should tick you off. This is, and excuse the word tick off, but the reality is that thing that just makes him mad and he doesn't have any place for it in his life should have the same thing with you. You and him, you and her, they should be walking in the same path, going after the purpose, not promoting the person. Moses didn't have 72 leaders under him to promote him, but it was to fulfill the purpose of God in his life. And that's what we have to realize. I want to talk to you about just two types of categories of people that are employees or workers or whatever it is. In the business world, if you're a secular employer that has employees, you have two types of people that work for you. One is the one that we all want, is the people that are part of the team to make a difference. They're part of it. They're making a difference. They're sold out to it. And the other one is the income status. You're just a paycheck. You're just my groceries. You're just paying my bills, and that's all you are. Those are the two types of employees that we find. You very rarely find somebody in the middle. Either I'm just there to clock in, clock out, or actually I have ownership in the company. These are the types of people. In the church, you have, I'm a volunteer. Nobody's paying me. I'm just here. I'm helping you. Be excited that I at least showed up and nobody else did. And that's a volunteer mindset. Then you have the one that says, I've been bought with a price. I no longer belong to myself. Jesus Christ owns me, and everything that I'm going to do for the church, I'm doing it for Jesus Christ. So I'm bought with a price. I'm not my own. And then I'm a volunteer. Can I tell you, I hate the volunteer mindset. I can't stand volunteer mindset because you didn't volunteer. Jesus bought you. You are owned by Jesus. Come on, I'm preaching better than you're saying amen today. And I know it's a leadership podcast, but you can see that passion that burns. I can't stand the volunteer because that's all you get is volunteers. You don't get people that are sold out for Jesus in the kingdom. So now we have business side, church side. Let me get off of that. But church side, business side. And they're both mirror each other. Income status looks like a volunteer. Somebody that's in it and has ownership looks just like the person that's been bought with a price. Same attitudes. You have two different types of people. And what we have to realize is these always going to have these two type of people around us. But what we need to do is not be the one that's a volunteer, and we definitely don't need to be the one that's income only. We need to be people that have ownership because we know we've been bought with a price. We've got to be these people if we're going to find great levels of success in our life, as well as the leaders. We have to help cultivate the people. We need to move them from income only and volunteer only over to ownership. And we can do that by helping them get the heart of what we've got going on and what God's called us to do. Amen. And so I want to talk about this, about leadership. Let's talk about Jesus. Jesus taught us a lot about imparting leadership into people. I opened it up and said he took 12 people and is still changing the world today. And none of them are alive. But what they did and how they did it is still greatly alive in our lives. He taught us these things. And we find this in a couple verses. In Matthew chapter 13, we find that he talks about the parable of sower, a few different places in the scriptures. And in Matthew 13, verse 16, he says, In verse 15, he says, those people over there that I said in parables, they don't get it. But you, in verse 16, you have eyes to see and ears to hear. So you're going to see something different and hear something different than everybody else is going to do. He's talking to the 12. Mark chapter 4, same parable, different reference to it out of the book of Mark. And he says Jesus spoke, in Mark chapter 4, verse 34, it says Jesus spoke parables to everyone, but those closest to him, he broke it down. Now, this is where it gets to the point of how do I get the heart that I have as a leader onto the people on me, and how do they receive it? So here's the thing we find in this thing is you can teach people all day long. You can hammer knowledge into people all day long. You can force the vision into somebody all day long. But if they don't catch it, it's not going to do anything for them. Jesus realized this. Jesus casted vision to people. He casted it. So he had 7 groups of people, 6 groups of people, but there were 7 groups of intimacy. And we find this, that he had the multitudes, he had the crowds, he had the 72, he had the 12, he had the 3, and he had the 1, and the other level of intimacy was God. So there's the 7 levels of intimacy Jesus had. Jesus never casted vision to the 12. He broke it down. But to everybody else, he casted a vision. He gave them the freedom to find interpretation. He gave them freedom to make decisions on their own. But the ones that chose to follow him, and not everybody's going to choose to follow you as a leader, but the ones he chose to follow him, that made a conscious decision to eliminate the volunteer mindset and become the one that I'm bought with a price, the one that changes from I'm in here for an income and paying bills to, man, I got ownership and stock in the company, and the success of the company looks good on me, and so I'm going to be rewarded for that. See the difference in the people? This is how Jesus dealt with. He casted vision to everybody, but those closest to him, he broke everything down. He sat down with him. He talked about him. He laid everything out of his heart, and not just what he saw, not just what a vision was, not formal, but just poured himself out into those around him. If you're the leader, you're gonna have to learn to spend time with those that are closest to you. You're going to have to be able to tell them things. You're going to have to share things that bother you, things that irritate you. You're going to have to begin to talk to them about things you don't like. You're going to have to begin to cast vision and sit down with them in private meetings and share your heart before you tell everybody else, and let them catch it. And you're going to have to do this more than one time. You can't just tell somebody one time and expect them to catch it. You got to think about those 72 elders or 70 elders that were with Moses. They were with him, and they did not catch his spirit until God put it upon them. He could have taught them. He could have told them. He did everything he knew to do. But until God intervened and they caught the spirit of Moses, it wasn't then until they helped him bear the burdens of everyday life. And so when we really look at this, when you have a solid team around you, this is what happens when they catch the vision. When you have that solid team around you and you spent that time with them, what you do is alleviate the burden of everyday decisions so that you can deal with the things that only you can deal with. The difference, the key difference to this whole component about having the spirit of my leader and not is the caught versus the taught. We're teaching people, we're telling people, we're preaching things, we're doing all of this stuff, and we find that people around us, they're not getting it. It's like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with you guys? But the reality, are we spending time with those that are closest to us? My team close to me, I don't spend a ton of time anymore of just meeting, because they're catching it. They're getting it. They're running with it. Because in the beginning, I spent a ton of time with them. I spent Monday nights with them. I began to talk to them about messages, and I spent weekly meetings with them. And they caught it. And it's a great thing. But we still meet. We still talk. We still cast vision. And it's easier because the minute they have the attitude and they hear what I have to say, they're catching it. And it's so much better. A solid team around you will allow you to do what only you can do, leader, because they're doing what God anointed them to do, which is bear the burdens of everyday life in the business, in the ministry, and you got to be able to do that. Moses' role was to lead the people, but it was too tough on his own, so he needed the people around him. And so, leader, you can be complaining that you have no help, or you can take the time to cast vision to multitudes, but spend a lot of time with some close people around you. And we got to see that Jesus spent a ton of time with Peter, James, and John. We know that he spent a ton of time with the 12, but he spent he spent some time with crowds and multitudes that followed him, but he didn't give them the time of day to break it all down. Moses didn't come and teach them. God put the Spirit upon those leaders. And so you have to let that happen. You got to find that and develop that and catch the vision. How do you do it? Let me give you 3 things today. How do I get the Spirit of my leader upon me? Leader, how do you get that Spirit upon them? You can't. They have to receive that. You can't put it. You got to but there are things that you have to do to be able to help them catch that vision. Here's the thing. How do you get the Spirit of your leader upon you? Now, before I get into it, I want to make sure that we're all clear. We're not in man worship here. And that's not what we do. We worship the Almighty God. But we look at what God set up in the church and how he does things. And he's never done anything in the earth without using a man. And we always have a man over us, or a woman, however that looks like to you. We always have authority over us. We always will, and it always has been. And so we've got to realize that there's always going to be people in our life. There's always going to be people that are in our life that are going to help us. They're going to lead us. They're going to direct us. They're there for our good, and they're not a problem, and they're not a thorn, right? So we have to realize that. So it's not man worship. It's the way God designed these things. So here's the first thing of how do I get the heart of my leader? How do I get that same Spirit? How do I do that? Before I get into that, let me say this. This is what it really means to have the heart. You act like, you answer the way they would answer. You make decisions the way they would make a decision. You put out fires the way they would put out the fire. This is what it really means. It doesn't mean that you dress like them, you talk like them, you eat everything that they eat, you like their flavors. That's not what we're talking about. That's crazy and weird and it's stupid. We're talking about you helping bear the burden in the business, in the ministry, whatever it is, and you're taking what's upon that leader and you're making sure that you're operating that way. When Felix, he's my right-hand guy in the ministry, when he came into the ministry and he started working, I told him, I said, Felix, you got to learn how I do things. You can't do things the way you do things. You can't correct people the way you would want to or the way Jimmy Squires did or anybody else. I need you to learn how to handle it the way I handle it. I need you to learn how to make decisions the way I'm going to make decisions. And over the last year, we've been working side by side of how to make decisions. And it's constant, me and him talking, me bringing things to his attention, because as he develops and as he grows into it, he's grabbing the heart and he don't have to ask no more because he knows how I would do that. And so it's bearing a burden that would be on my weight. He's bearing that, making success happen in our ministry. And it's a great thing that's happening. So you got to realize this is what it means and what it looks like. And as leaders, we need people under us like this. And people that are under leadership, this is what your role should be for the leader. Not promoting yourself, but for the leader. Okay? So let's talk about 3 things. Number 1, know your role. Are you the leader? Are you the elder? Or are you the people? Which 3 are you? You're the people that got problems, you're the elder that's helping the leader, or you're the leader that's leading the people. You've got to know your role. And until you do, you're never going to catch the vision. You're never going to understand. Number 1, anything with 2 heads is a freak. We know this. It's a monster. And so there's not 2 heads. So if you're not the leader, don't be the leader. Don't try to be the leader. Don't walk in a grace that God hasn't given you. Know your role. If you're the leader, then lead. Let people pull potential out of, stretch people to help you do what God's called you to do. And you'll be able to do more when you have people around you doing it, but they'll only do it when they catch your heart. So you're going to have to spend some time and know your role. Listen, you got to beat down, and knowing your role, you got to beat down pride and arrogance. This is something that has come to me, and I've really meditated upon what does this really mean, pride and arrogance. Pride is wanting something that you can't have. So you got to beat that down. You can't say, I want to be the leader. I wish I was the leader. I wish I had that position. That's pride. Arrogance is saying, I could do it better. So we got to beat that out of our life to be able to have the heart. We got to respect that what God has put upon each person, and we got to walk in that, and we got to love that person and be honorable to where we are, but we got to know our role. And to know our role, you got to beat down pride, wishing you had something that you're not graced to do, and arrogance, thinking that you're better than everybody else. You got to beat that down. Leaders, you got to beat that down. You need the people around you. You need teams around you. You need leaders around you, because this weight of this thing is too great for you to do it on your own. That's why God set up leadership the way he did. We also got to realize that we got to walk in the grace that we've been given and not ask for something that we can't do. And it's interesting. When I went from the second in charge to the first in charge, when I went from associate to senior pastor, the grace was different. And I felt it inside. I can't explain it, but there was a different grace about me to be able to lead people in pastoral versus supporting a pastor. There's a different grace there. And so I never wanted the lead pastor. I was happy in the supportive. And I learned how to beat down pride, and I learned how to beat down arrogance many times in my life that would rise up when they would make a decision that I didn't like, and I thought it was the dumbest decision. But it was like, that's not my place. They're the leader. My job is to help them do what they're deciding to do. And you got to beat that thing down. You got to know your role if you want to get the heart of your leader. Number 2, you got to be attentive to your leader. So you know your role. Here's kind of what it looks like. You got to know if you're a leader, elder, or people. Then you got to be attentive to your leader. What does that mean? You got to have eyes to see and ears to hear. This is something that's so, in my mind, that I learned is so profound, is what are you listening to and what are you watching? Are you listening to what they're saying? Are you watching what they're doing? Are you listening more about how it come across rather than what they're saying? Are you watching their body language rather than their what you want them to do for you? I've always learned this. Always hear the message and forget about the messenger. This is one of the biggest keys to getting the heart of your leader. Sometimes as leaders, we're going to get mad, we're going to get frustrated, we're going to act in flesh, we're going to act angry, we're going to snap, we're going to lash out. And that's not biblical. It's not the being led of the Spirit. It's none of those things. But we're going to do it. Let's just be real. The problem with those that are under us, if they see that and they only hear the way it comes across, they're never going to receive it. So let me talk to you that are listening today. You've got to have ears to hear and eyes to see, not the individual, but the purpose of God in your life. And you've got to be able to throw the messenger away at times and get the message out of it. You got to understand, you got to be attentive to the leader. What does that mean? Be present in every conversation and every preaching. So if you're in the church and you hear your pastor preaching, and that's why you should listen to your pastor and be a part of your pastor. And if you're not in church, be online and watch church, or go back and watch church, one of the two, and hear what the pastor has to say and be present. That don't mean just be there. That means attentive. What are you listening for? Because most pastors are casting vision in every church service. And if you're not hearing the vision, then you're never going to go knock on the door and say, hey, explain to us the parable. You're never going to do what the disciples did, right? So you got to be attentive to your leader. You got to be present. You got to listen intently to what he's saying or what she's saying. You got to pay attention. Read between the lines, if you will. Listen to what they're saying. What is their heart? Not the words that are coming out, but what's driving, what's in the passion, what's coming out of their mouth. This is not just in public, but it's also in private, in sit-down conversations and in dinner dates with you and your spouse and them and their spouse. Or it's just as they talk, as you ask certain questions, you just see things and you hear things, and then you're asking God, explain that to me. Talk to me about that. You said this. I want to put on this last one, and I'm gonna bring this one thought to you, is you got to know what makes them tick, and you got to know what ticks them off. This is what it means to be attentive to your leader. If you want to lead the way they lead, you want to help make decisions the way they make decisions, you're going to have to know what makes them tick and what ticks them off. My father-in-law, when he was helping me and developing me and mentoring me and raising me and discipling me, little things that I would learn. When he'd walk into the room, he didn't really care about where the chairs were sitting. He cared about if there was a paint spot on the ceiling, if there was a piece of paper on the carpet, did it smell good, and then he looked at the chairs. So what I began to learn is what makes him tick and what ticks him off. Because if I know what ticks him off, he's going to be able to give more energy and effort to what makes him tick if he don't have to deal with what ticks him off. This is what it means to be attentive to your leader. You got to know them, what they do like and what they don't like. Like for me, for example, a lot of guys know I can't stand doors to be open. So if a closet door is cracked, I go shut the closet door. And those things take my attention. And why? I can't explain it. Don't ask me. Don't know. It's just one of them OCD moments in my life. And so I'm constantly shutting doors everywhere I go. Everywhere I go, it's something in my mind that says that door shouldn't be open. Shut the door. I don't like paper on the floor. I don't like certain things. There's certain things I don't like. And when people know that about me, and when I walk in and I don't have to think about it, it makes life easier for me. But when people don't shut a door, now my mind goes to thinking about the door rather than what I'm supposed to be doing. This is what I mean, be attentive. You got to know every detail. You got to know the things that make them tick. Push them to that. And whatever ticks them off, you got to be attentive to that. So if you can deal with those things, they can go do what really they need to do. This is how you get the heart. You think, well, what does the trash on the floor got to do with it? Oh, a whole lot. You get the heart of your leader. And then you begin to develop those things. And you begin to lead the ministry, the business, the way they would, because you know exactly what they don't like. So it's just simple things that you got to do. It's how to, you got to be attentive to your leader. You have to know your role. Are you the leader? Are you the elder? Or are you the people? You got to know that role. You got to be attentive to your leader. You have ears to hear and eyes to see. This is what Jesus told his disciples. You got to be able to see things that nobody else does, and you got to be able to hear things that nobody else is hearing. And the last thing is this. Know your role. You got to be attentive. And the third one is probably the most simple, but the most profound. Remove the burden. Don't be the burden. No, there was no mute on the audio. Remove the burden. Don't be the burden. That to me is so profound. You got to do the work. You know, the elders, after they got the spirit of Moses, they went out and did the work. They were no longer the problem. They weren't the work. They were the help to the work. And so the elders were to keep a handle of the burden, not be the burden. They were the ones that were to remove the burden from Moses, not become the burden. They didn't go to Moses every day and get counsel about every little thing. They learned how Moses would handle situations, and they just handled them. They didn't even have to report to Moses because there was too many things to report. Only thing they did is when they were no longer graced to deal with a problem, they handed it over to Moses. That's how we have to learn in leadership. You got to remove the burden and not be the burden. That is so simple, but yet so profound. You got to go do what you've been anointed to do. Go remove a burden and stop being the burden. I did an episode on this, about making decisions and how you do this and being second in charge. And I challenge you to go back and listen to it. But don't come with a question without bringing advice or suggestions to your leader. Don't make your leader think about things when that's your job. You just give them what the best option is and let them choose. And normally they're going to choose whatever you say because they don't have to think about it. That's what I mean by removing the burden. You becoming the burden is you're bringing all of your problems that you're having in the business and your personal life to them. Now they're not able to go do what they're supposed to do because they're doing their job and your job. You know, we got to adjust. We must adhere. We must adjust to their lifestyle and alleviate the burdens of theirs. We got to realize that it's not man worship, but this is how we become successful in our life. We have to remove the burdens and not be the burden, right? That's the biggest key. Again, how do you do that? You know what ticks and what makes them tick and what ticks them off. Don't do the things that tick them off. Don't create irritations and frustrations in their life. Remove all of that in their life, right? Here's what I'm saying. The success of every great leader is having great leaders under them who can think, act, decide just like them. Here's what you have to do. You have to choose to catch the heart of your leader to find greater success. Know your role. Be attentive to your leader in public and private arenas. And then don't be the burden. Go do the work. This is what it means to have the heart. And why? Because when we have the heart, we're all running after the same vision. We're all chasing down the same purpose. We're all here to do what we need to do to help benefit the ministry and or the business in our life so that we can all be successful. Your job as a follower is to alleviate the burdens of your leader. Leader, your job is to promote the vision and get your heart upon the people so that together you're running with the vision and doing what God's called you to do. Man, I hope this has helped you. I hope you'll leave this podcast. You'll go back and think about it. Leaders, if you'll sit down with your teams, this might strike up some conversations about how to do it. You may have one team member and you may have 20 team members, but this is something that every business and every church must have to find greater levels of success. It's in the scriptures, so it should be in our lives. Amen. So I hope this has added value to you. Again, if it has, please share this with somebody that it would add value to them. Leave a comment, hit the subscribe button. Hey, until next time, I call you blessed, and may the anointing of God come upon you and operate through you to accomplish everything God has called you to do.